The Alpha King thought she was just a maid, until his wolves chose her. "Hello, everyone, and welcome." The first scream came from the eastern courtyard before sunrise, sharp enough to wake every servant in Blackridge Castle. By the time Penelope Hartley reached the arched doorway, 3 guards were already bleeding. An iron gate hung crooked from one hinge, and the king's black wolf stood in the center of the training yard with a broken chain dragging behind him. Ronan was larger than any natural wolf, his dark fur bristling like smoke beneath the winter sky. Foam glistened at his jaws. A snapped arrow protruded from his shoulder, and something unnatural burned in his amber eyes. Men who had faced battle stepped backward when he growled. Penelope did not. Before we continue, please subscribe and tap the notification bell. It helps our channel grow and allows us to keep sharing stories about courage, compassion, and destiny. Now, back to Penelope. She had spent 3 years learning how to disappear inside Blackridge. At 24, she understood that a maid survived by keeping her eyes lowered, her hands busy, and her opinions hidden. Her chestnut hair was always braided neatly at the nape of her neck. Her plain gray dress carried no embroidery, no family crest, nothing that invited questions. Only the silver leaf pendant beneath her collar and the pale crescent-shaped scar across her left palm belonged entirely to her. "Stay back," Captain Nolan Pierce barked as she stepped into the yard. Penelope barely heard him. She was watching Ronan's breathing. Too fast, too shallow. The wolf was not hunting. He was hurting. A guard raised a crossbow. Ronan's head snapped toward him, and the courtyard filled with a growl so deep the frost seemed to tremble. "Don't shoot," Penelope said. Nolan turned on her. "You were told to stay back. The arrow is poisoned, and you are a maid." His words struck with practiced contempt, yet she had heard worse in quieter rooms. Penelope looked past him. On the balcony above, King Tristan Whitaker had appeared without cloak or crown, dressed in black trousers and a half-fastened shirt as though the alarm had pulled him from sleep. Even at a distance, his authority changed the air. Tall and broad-shouldered, with dark brown hair and a narrow scar near his right temple, he watched the courtyard through cold amber eyes. "Clear the yard," Tristan ordered. "Your Majesty." Penelope called before fear could silence her. "If they corner him, he'll attack." Every face turned toward her. Servants did not address the Alpha King without permission. They certainly did not correct him. Tristan's gaze settled on her, as if noticing a misplaced object. "And what would you suggest?" "Let me go to him." Nolan laughed once. "She cleans the northern corridors and carries feed to the kennels. She knows nothing." Penelope's fingers closed around the hidden pendant at her throat. She did know one thing. Pain often looked like rage when no one cared enough to come closer. Ronan staggered. The movement was small, almost invisible beneath his fury, but she saw it. So did Tristan. "One step," the king said. "If he turns on you, the guards fire." Penelope entered the yard. Snow soaked through her thin shoes. Ronan's lips peeled back, revealing ivory fangs, and every instinct begged her to run. Instead, she lowered her gaze and spoke as she did to frightened animals in the royal kennels. "I know," she whispered. "It hurts, and everyone keeps shouting." The wolf's growl faltered. Behind her, someone drew a breath. Penelope moved closer, slowly enough that he could refuse her. "You don't have to trust me," she said. "Just don't fight alone." Ronan lunged. Guards raised their weapons. Tristan's command cracked across the courtyard, but Penelope did not move. The enormous wolf stopped inches from her chest, his breath hot against her face. For one suspended moment, she saw nothing except the agony in his eyes. Then she lifted her scarred hand and laid it against his muzzle. Ronan shuddered. His legs folded beneath him, and the beast every soldier feared lowered his head at the feet of a maid. Silence swallowed the courtyard. Penelope knelt beside him, reaching carefully toward the poisoned arrow. Nolan seized her arm. Ronan surged up with a roar so violent the captain stumbled away. The wolf placed his body between Penelope and every armed man in Blackridge, his teeth bared in warning. Above them, King Tristan's expression changed, not to gratitude, but suspicion. He descended the stone stairs without taking his eyes from her. Penelope felt the weight of his attention before he spoke. "Who are you?" She looked down at her servant's dress, then back at the king who had never noticed her before. "Penelope Hartley, your Majesty." Tristan studied Ronan, standing guard at her side. "That tells me your name," he said quietly. It does not tell me what you did to my wolf. Everett Shaw escorted Penelope through silent stone corridors instead of the servant passages she normally used, and that alone was enough to make every pair of curious eyes follow her. She walked with steady steps despite the whispers blooming behind every doorway. Some believed she had bewitched the king's wolf. Others insisted she would be dismissed before sunset. Penelope answered none of them. She had learned long ago that rumors exhausted themselves when they found no argument. Everett finally stopped outside a modest council chamber where a fire crackled against the lingering morning chill. King Tristan stood beside the tall windows overlooking the snow-covered training grounds, his hands clasped behind his back. Ronan rested outside below, refusing to leave the courtyard despite repeated commands from the handlers. Tristan turned only after the heavy door closed. His expression remained unreadable. "Sit," he said. Penelope remained standing. "I'd rather stay, Your Majesty." A faint crease appeared between his brows before disappearing again. "As you wish. Tell me exactly what happened." She drew a slow breath. "I saw he was frightened. He was enraged. Pain often looks like anger." Tristan studied her for several silent seconds. "You approached an animal that has killed enemy warriors." "What?" "Because everyone else approached him as if he were already a monster." The answer lingered in the room. Everett quietly folded his arms, watching the exchange without interruption. Tristan moved toward the table where the broken arrow now rested inside a wooden tray. Dark stains covered the iron tip. "Our healer confirmed an uncommon toxin," he said. "Few people would have recognized it." Penelope lowered her eyes. "My mother taught me to notice wounds before words." "Your mother served here?" "Years ago." "What was her name?" For the first time that morning, hesitation crossed her face. "Clara Hartley." Tristan searched his memory but found nothing familiar. Blackridge had employed hundreds of servants across the years. One forgotten name meant little. "Did she teach you how to command wolves?" Penelope looked genuinely confused. "No, sir." "Then explain why Ronan obeyed you." She glanced toward the frosted window where the great black wolf still lay motionless below. "He didn't obey me." Tristan's jaw tightened. "I watched him kneel. He chose not to fight anymore." Before Tristan could respond, 3 measured knocks echoed through the chamber. Everett opened the door, revealing Beatrice when accompanied by an elegant young woman wrapped in a silver traveling cloak trimmed with white fur. Lady Marissa Caldwell entered with graceful confidence, her pale blue eyes immediately settling on Penelope's plain servant dress. "I hope I'm not interrupting," Marissa said pleasantly, although her smile never reached her eyes. "I heard there was excitement in the courtyard." Tristan inclined his head. "Nothing requiring your concern. Everyone in the castle seems concerned." Her gaze lingered on Penelope another moment, especially about her. Penelope lowered her head respectfully, but Marissa continued speaking as though she were no longer in the room. "Is this truly the maid responsible for today's disturbance?" "She prevented bloodshed," Everett answered evenly. Marissa offered a soft laugh. "Or created a more interesting problem." Tristan dismissed Penelope before the conversation continued. She bowed once and quietly followed Beatrice into the hallway. Neither woman spoke until they reached the servant wing. Only then did the older housekeeper stop beside a narrow window overlooking the royal kennels. "You've become the subject of every conversation before noon," Beatrice said. "That is rarely a blessing. I never wanted attention." "I know." Beatrice's stern features softened for only an instant. "Stay away from the wolves for a few days. Let the castle forget." Penelope nodded, though something unsettled her as she crossed the courtyard carrying fresh linens later that afternoon. The kennels had fallen strangely silent. One after another, every royal wolf abandoned its food bowl and slowly turned toward her. None barked. None growled. They simply watched her pass with unwavering eyes, as if waiting for something only they understood. From the balcony above, unseen by Penelope, Tristan witnessed the same impossible scene, and for the first time, doubt quietly challenged everything he believed he had already decided. The following morning, frost still clung to the castle roofs when King Tristan ordered a full readiness inspection of Blackridge's Royal Wolf Corps. Officially, it was a routine exercise. In truth, he wanted answers. Every handler, guard, and officer gathered inside the broad training enclosure while Dr. Graham Bellamy quietly examined Ronan's healing shoulder. The poison had begun to leave the great wolf's body, Yet something else continued to trouble the king. Ronan had obeyed every command for years without hesitation. One meeting with an ordinary maid should not have changed anything. Penelope spent the morning polishing silver trays in the western kitchens until Beatrice approached with unusual urgency. "The banquet hall needs fresh linen immediately," she instructed. "Use the eastern corridor. Stay clear of the training grounds." Penelope accepted the folded cloths without complaint. She intended to do exactly as she was told. Fate had other plans. As she crossed the covered gallery overlooking the courtyard, a sharp whistle echoed below. One by one, the royal handlers released 6 magnificent wolves for the obedience demonstration. Tristan stood beside Everett, watching with folded arms while Nolan barked commands across the yard. "Advance." The wolves surged forward together. "Hold." Every animal stopped instantly. Nolan allowed himself a satisfied smile before giving the final order. "Return." 5 wolves wheeled back toward their trainers. The 6th, a silver she-wolf named Sable, froze. Her ears lifted. Her nose searched the cold air. Then, ignoring Nolan completely, she turned toward the gallery above. Penelope instinctively stepped backward, believing she had somehow startled the animal. Sable bounded across the courtyard, clearing a low stone wall in one effortless leap before stopping beneath the balcony. Her tail remained perfectly still. Her golden eyes never left Penelope's face. "Recall." Nolan shouted again. The she-wolf did not even twitch. A murmur spread through the assembled soldiers. Tristan narrowed his eyes. Again, Nolan's voice grew harsher. "Sable, return." Instead, another wolf abandoned formation. Then another. Within seconds, 4 of the king's most disciplined companions had crossed the yard, gathering beneath the gallery where Penelope stood frozen with an armful of white linen. She looked over the railing, utterly bewildered. "Please," she whispered under her breath, "go back." Sable answered with a soft whine unlike anything Tristan had ever heard from one of his war wolves. Everett exchanged a troubled glance with the king. "This isn't normal." "No," Tristan replied quietly. "It isn't." Nolan stormed toward the staircase leading to the gallery. "Move away from the railing," he snapped the moment he reached Penelope. "You're distracting them." "I'm doing nothing." "Exactly. Yet they're ignoring every order." He reached for her elbow to pull her away. Before his hand touched her sleeve, Sable released a deep warning rumble that echoed across the stone walls. The remaining wolves instantly joined her, forming a tense line below. Every guard in the courtyard instinctively reached for a weapon. Penelope gently stepped away from Nolan on her own. "Please don't frighten them," she said softly. "They're already unsettled." "You presume to lecture an officer?" Nolan hissed. Tristan had heard enough. "Captain," he called, his calm voice carrying greater authority than any shout, "stand down." Nolan reluctantly obeyed, though resentment burned plainly across his face. Penelope lowered the basket of folded linens onto the balcony floor. She rested one hand lightly against the cold stone rail without making another sound. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, Sable relaxed first. One after another, the other wolves settled beside her until the entire courtyard fell into complete stillness. No commands had accomplished what simple patience now had. Dr. Bellamy watched the scene with unusual intensity. His thoughtful gaze shifted from the wolves to the silver leaf pendant resting briefly outside Penelope's collar before she tucked it back beneath her dress. Something flickered across the elderly healer's face. Not recognition yet, but the faint beginning of a memory he could not quite grasp. Tristan noticed the glance. "Do you know something?" he asked quietly. Graham hesitated. "Not yet, Your Majesty." The answer was honest, but incomplete. As the inspection finally ended, Penelope hurried away, desperate to disappear once more into the quiet corners of the castle. She never saw Lady Marissa watching from an upper window, her elegant smile slowly fading into something colder. If the wolves continued choosing a servant over the future queen, Marissa knew whispers would soon become dangerous, and she had no intention of allowing that to happen. That evening, Blackridge Castle glowed beneath hundreds of candles as noble families from across the northern territories arrived for the royal banquet. Servants moved through the marble corridors with lowered heads, carrying crystal goblets and silver platters while musicians filled the great hall with gentle strings. Penelope kept her attention fixed on her work, hoping that another quiet night might finally allow the strange events of the past 2 days to fade into memory. Instead, every whispered conversation seemed to follow her footsteps. Lady Marissa Caldwell welcomed each guest with effortless grace, yet her eyes searched constantly until they settled upon the young maid arranging wine beside the high table. A faint smile crossed her face, the kind that hid intention behind flawless manners. Moments later, as Penelope stepped forward to refill a crystal glass, Marissa shifted ever so slightly. Her jeweled sleeve brushed the tray. Ruby-colored wine splashed across the white ceremonial cloak draped beside King Tristan's chair, staining the ancient wolf crest embroidered across its chest. The music stopped. Every conversation dissolved into stunned silence. Nolan Pierce seized the opportunity before anyone could speak. "Careless servant," he declared, his voice echoing through the chamber. "Do you understand what you've ruined? That cloak has belonged to the Whitaker bloodline for generations." Penelope stared at the spreading stain. I didn't touch it." "Enough." Nolan snatched the empty tray from her hands, letting it crash against the stone floor. "Kneel before His Majesty and beg forgiveness." Around the hall, nobles watched with quiet satisfaction. Some pitied her. Most simply enjoyed the spectacle. Penelope slowly lowered herself to one knee, not because she believed she was guilty, but because resisting would only disgrace the servants who worked beside her. She kept her head high even as humiliation burned beneath her calm expression. Tristan remained silent. He had seen only the final instant, not the subtle movement that caused the accident. His duty demanded order before sentiment, and uncertainty held him motionless. That silence hurt Penelope more deeply than any accusation. She had never expected kindness from a king, but she had hoped for fairness. Lady Marissa folded her hands gracefully. "Your Majesty," she said with practiced concern. Perhaps the poor girl simply became overwhelmed. Such responsibilities can be difficult for someone of humble experience. The words sounded merciful, yet every noble understood the insult beneath them. Before Tristan could answer, a distant howl rolled across the castle grounds. Then another. Then dozens more joined together until the stone walls seemed to vibrate beneath the haunting chorus. Guests exchanged uneasy glances. Everett stepped toward the tall windows overlooking the royal kennels. "That isn't normal," he murmured. The howling stopped as abruptly as it had begun, leaving an unsettling stillness behind. Penelope slowly rose after Nolan ordered her to stand aside. She intended to disappear through the servants' entrance and leave the embarrassment behind. Instead, Dr. Graham Bellamy caught a brief glimmer beneath the collar of her dress as she bent to gather the shattered crystal. The silver leaf pendant had slipped free for only a heartbeat. Graham's eyes widened almost imperceptibly. Somewhere inside decades of forgotten memories, an old symbol stirred. He opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, unable to grasp the elusive thought. Across the hall, Tristan noticed the healer's unusual reaction but had no opportunity to question him. Outside, another sound shattered the uneasy silence. Not a howl this time, but the heavy crash of timber splintering. The enormous doors of the great hall trembled beneath a powerful impact. A second strike followed, louder than the first. Every guard reached for a weapon. Every noble stepped backward. Penelope turned toward the entrance just as a deep, unmistakable growl rumbled from the other side. And in that instant, everyone inside Blackridge understood that the night had changed forever. The final blow did not merely force the great doors open, it shattered them. Ancient oak exploded inward, splinters scattering across the polished marble as an icy wind swept through the banquet hall. Every musician fell silent. Every noble instinctively rose to their feet. Guards rushed forward, forming a protective line between the broken entrance and the royal family, yet none dared strike first. From the drifting dust emerged Ronan. His powerful black frame moved with calm, deliberate purpose, each heavy step echoing through the stunned chamber. Behind him came Sable, then another wolf, then another. Within moments, every royal wolf in Blackridge had entered the hall without a single handler at its side. Not one looked toward the throne. Not one acknowledged the frightened nobles pressing themselves against the walls. King Tristan slowly raised his hand. "No one attacks," he ordered. His voice remained steady, though confusion tightened every word. Ronan had followed him through years of war, danger, and victory. Never once had the great wolf ignored his command. Yet today something deeper than training guided the entire pack. Ronan walked past the throne without hesitation. Sable followed. The others moved behind them in perfect silence. Their destination was unmistakable. Penelope instinctively retreated until her back nearly touched a stone pillar. Her breathing quickened. "Please," she whispered, shaking her head. "Don't come any closer." She feared neither teeth nor claws. She feared what this moment would mean if every eye in the kingdom witnessed it. Nolan Pierce stepped between her and the advancing wolves, drawing his sword with a sharp metallic ring. "Protect His Majesty," he shouted. Ronan stopped. Slowly, he turned toward the captain. He did not snarl or bare his fangs. He simply met Nolan's eyes with quiet warning. The captain's confidence faltered, and for the first time in years he lowered his weapon without being ordered to do so. Tristan descended from the dais. "Ronan," he called in the calm voice that had led the royal pack since the day he became alpha. "Return." Ronan's ears flicked. For one hopeful heartbeat, Tristan believed the familiar bond would hold. The black wolf looked directly at his king, then gently turned away and continued toward Penelope. A ripple of astonishment swept through the hall. Tristan drew a slow breath before speaking again, this time with unmistakable alpha authority. "That is an order." Every noble waited. Every servant held their breath. Not a single wolf obeyed. Instead, Sable reached Penelope first. The silver she-wolf quietly lowered her head until her nose rested beside the young woman's scarred hand. Penelope stared at her in disbelief. "No," she whispered softly. "Everyone is watching." Another wolf stepped forward and repeated the gesture. Then another. Then another. One by one, the royal pack surrounded the frightened maid with silent reverence rather than aggression. Tears gathered in Penelope's eyes as she slowly shook her head. "Please stand," she pleaded. "I'm nobody. You belong beside your king." Her words only deepened the stillness. Ronan finally stopped before her. For several endless heartbeats, wolf and woman simply looked at one another. Then, with solemn purpose, Ronan lowered himself onto his front legs and bowed his head at her feet. Sable followed immediately. One after another, every royal wolf did the same until the entire pack knelt before a servant whose apron still bore the stains of an ordinary day's work. No one in the hall dared breathe. Crystal goblets trembled in unsteady hands. Lady Marissa's composed smile vanished completely. Graham Bellamy felt forgotten memories surge together at last. Everett looked toward Tristan, but the king remained motionless, unable to tear his eyes away from the impossible sight before him. He had spent years earning the loyalty of his wolves through discipline, leadership, and sacrifice. Penelope had earned something even deeper without seeking it at all. Tristan slowly approached the silent circle. He stopped only a few feet from her. Penelope looked up, tears glistening across her gray-blue eyes. There was no triumph in her expression, only confusion and fear. "Your Majesty," she whispered, "I never wanted this." Tristan believed her completely. Every trembling breath, every attempt to send the wolves away, every instinct to make herself smaller told him she desired neither power nor attention. She simply possessed a kindness none of them fully understood. Still, one question remained. Looking directly at Ronan, Tristan gave one final command. "Rise." Ronan remained exactly where he was. The silence became almost unbearable. Tristan closed his eyes for the briefest moment before speaking again, not as a king demanding obedience, but as the man who had raised the wolf from a wounded cub. "Please." Ronan lifted his gaze toward Tristan with unmistakable affection, then quietly turned back toward Penelope without moving. In that gentle refusal, Tristan understood that he had not been rejected. His wolves had recognized a truth long before he had. Penelope swallowed hard and reached out with hesitant fingers, brushing Ronan's shoulder. "It's all right," she whispered. "He still needs you. Please stand." Ronan immediately rose. Sable followed. Then every wolf stood together as one. None had answered the Alpha King's command. Every one of them had answered hers. Tristan looked at Penelope with entirely new eyes. The wolves had chosen her first. Now it was his turn to choose what kind of king he would become. Turning to Everett without looking away from the young woman, he made the decision that would change Blackridge forever. From this moment, he declared for the entire court to hear, "Penelope Hartley is under my personal protection." No one will threaten, accuse, or harm her until I uncover why the royal pact chose her before their own alpha. The castle settled into an uneasy silence after the impossible scene in the Great Hall, but nothing inside Blackridge felt ordinary anymore. Wherever Penelope walked, conversation stopped. Some servants offered timid smiles. Others hurried away, unwilling to be seen near the woman the royal wolves had chosen. She no longer belonged among them, yet she did not feel she belonged anywhere else. At King Tristan's command, Everett escorted her to a modest chamber within the inner keep. It was comfortable but unadorned, a place of safety rather than privilege. Before leaving, the beta paused beside the door. "Until His Majesty understands what happened," he said honestly, "you're not a prisoner. But you're not free to wander alone either." Penelope nodded. "I understand." After a moment, she quietly added, "I'm afraid everyone believes I've taken something that never belonged to me." Everett studied her for a long second before replying. "If you wanted power, you had every chance to use the wolves against us yesterday." He opened the door. "You didn't." Across the castle, Tristan gathered Everett and Dr. Graham Bellamy inside the council chamber. The king stood beside the fire, staring at the winter snow beyond the tall windows. "My wolves ignored a direct command," he said at last. "Yet they still obeyed her without hesitation." "Explain that." Graham carefully placed the faded parchment bearing the silver leaf upon the table. "I don't believe they obeyed Miss Hartley," he replied. "I believe they recognized her." Tristan looked toward him. "Recognized what?" The elderly healer hesitated. "That is the question I have been asking myself since the banquet." Graham reached into his leather satchel and removed several worn notes copied from forgotten royal records. "Many years ago, when I was a young apprentice, an elderly healer told me a story about a woman named Clara Hartley." Tristan immediately turned. "Penelope's mother." Graham nodded slowly. "Clara worked in Blackridge before you became king. She rarely spoke about herself, but every injured wolf in the royal kennels became strangely calm when she entered. At the time, everyone dismissed it as coincidence." He gently unfolded another brittle page. "The old healer once warned me, if you ever see a silver leaf around the neck of someone named Hartley, protect them before asking questions." I never understood why. After his death, the story faded from memory. Everett leaned closer. "Until you saw Penelope's pendant." "Yes." Graham traced the faded symbol with one finger. "That necklace is older than the Whittaker dynasty itself." Tristan remained silent. For the first time, the mystery no longer felt like a series of isolated events. Ronan's trust, Sable's devotion, Clara's forgotten reputation, and Penelope's quiet compassion all seemed connected by a thread stretching far beyond his lifetime. Meanwhile, Penelope sat alone beside the narrow window of her chamber, turning the silver leaf pendant between her fingers. Her mother's voice echoed softly through memory. "Never take this off, Penny. One day it will remind someone else who you truly are." As a little girl, she had laughed, believing it was only another bedtime story. Now those words carried a weight she had never imagined. A gentle knock interrupted her thoughts. Iris stepped inside carrying a tray with fresh bread and warm tea. "I thought you shouldn't eat alone," she said with a shy smile. The simple kindness loosened something inside Penelope that had remained tightly guarded for years. The two women spent the next hour speaking not about wolves or prophecies, but about gardens, music, and childhood memories. For the first time since everything had changed, Penelope laughed. Outside the room, Tristan happened to pass through the corridor. Hearing that quiet laugh stopped him in his tracks. It was the first genuine happiness he had heard from her since the day they met, and he realized with unexpected regret that nearly every memory she carried of him involved suspicion, interrogation, or silence. At that same hour, beneath the eastern watchtower, Lady Marissa met Nolan Pierce in secret. "The king is beginning to believe her," Nolan muttered. Marissa's expression remained calm, but her eyes had hardened. "Then we must give him a reason not to." "How?" "If another wolf loses control," she replied softly, "everyone will blame the one person every wolf refuses to leave." Neither realized that Graham, returning from the archives with his old notes tucked beneath his arm, had paused just beyond the stone archway. He could not hear every word, but he heard enough to understand one terrifying truth. Whatever mystery surrounded Penelope had existed long before she arrived at Blackridge. The danger threatening her, however, had only just begun. Before dawn, while most of Blackridge still slept beneath a blanket of winter frost, Dr. Graham Bellamy refused to ignore what he had overheard beneath the eastern watchtower the night before. Carrying his old notes and the faded parchment marked with the silver leaf, he led King Tristan and Everett through forgotten corridors beneath the oldest tower of the castle. Their footsteps echoed through silent stone passageways where centuries of dust had buried the kingdom's earliest memories. At the end of the narrow corridor stood an iron chest sealed with the crest of Blackridge's first Alpha Kings. Graham broke the brittle lock and carefully lifted the lid. Inside rested a weathered journal wrapped in cracked leather. The moment he opened it, Tristan's breath caught. Drawn across the first page was the same silver leaf pendant Penelope had worn since childhood. Beneath it, faded words waited as though they had survived generations for this very morning. Asterisk, the wolves will always recognize the last moon warden before the Alpha King does. Asterisk, Tristan slowly turned the fragile pages. They revealed the truth hidden from every ruler who came before him. The moon wardens possessed no power to command wolves. They carried something far rarer, a quiet inheritance that the royal pack recognized instinctively. Their purpose was never to rule beside the Alpha King, but to remind him that strength without compassion would eventually become fear. Graham gently closed the journal. "Someone erased them," he said softly, "because kindness cannot be controlled as easily as power." Tristan lowered his eyes. Every impossible moment since Penelope entered Blackridge suddenly fit together. Ronan's trust, Sable's devotion, Clara Hartley's forgotten name, the silver leaf. None of it had been coincidence. His wolves had not abandoned him. They had remembered a promise older than the throne itself. Before another word could be spoken, the castle bells shattered the silence. Everett rushed toward the narrow window overlooking the eastern courtyard. Below, panic spread across Blackridge as one of the largest battle wolves smashed through its enclosure. White foam clung to its jaws. Its frantic movements mirrored the poisoned rage Ronan had endured only days before. "The toxin," Graham whispered. "They've done it again." The three men raced upstairs without hesitation. At that same moment, Penelope was helping Iris gather winter herbs inside the conservatory. The terrified cries outside reached them before they understood what had happened. They hurried toward the courtyard just as the maddened wolf fixed its eyes on Iris. Guards shouted for her to run, but fear rooted the young woman where she stood. Without stopping to think, Penelope stepped between Iris and the charging beast. She carried no weapon, no shield, and no certainty she would survive. Only one thought filled her heart. Asterisk, if someone must suffer today, let it be me. Asterisk, the wolf lunged. Penelope stood her ground. Instead of striking back, she lifted both hands toward the terrified creature. "You're not my enemy," she whispered through trembling breath. "You're only hurting." The wolf crashed into her. One sharp fang reopened the old crescent scar across her left palm. A drop of blood slipped onto the silver leaf pendant. For one quiet heartbeat, the pendant seemed to answer something far older than light itself. A soft silver radiance flowed gently across the wolf's trembling body, not like magic forcing obedience, but like an ancient promise finally remembered. The animal's furious snarls faded into frightened cries before its powerful legs slowly folded beneath it. At that same instant, every royal wolf across Blackridge lifted its voice together. Their united howl rolled over the mountains, not as a call to battle, but as a solemn welcome carried across generations. Graham reached the courtyard beside Tristan just as the last shimmer disappeared. Tears filled the old healer's eyes. "The covenant was never lost," he whispered. "It was only waiting for someone worthy to awaken it." Tristan could not look away from Penelope. She knelt beside the exhausted wolf, paying no attention to the blood running down her own hand as she gently comforted the creature that had nearly taken her life. In that moment, his final doubt vanished. He had spent years earning the loyalty of his wolves through discipline, courage, and command. Penelope had earned something even deeper through compassion alone. Then Nolan Pierce's voice shattered the silence. "She's using forbidden magic," he shouted. "She's bewitched the royal pack from the very beginning." Uneasy murmurs spread among the gathered guards. Several instinctively reached for their weapons. High above the courtyard, Lady Marissa remained silent, allowing fear to finish the work she had begun. The royal wolves immediately formed a living shield around Penelope. This time Tristan did not hesitate. He walked straight through the protective circle until he stood beside her. Without taking his eyes from the frightened soldiers, he drew his sword, not against Penelope, but against anyone who would threaten her. Anyone who wishes to accuse this woman, he declared with the full authority of the Alpha King, will first have to accuse the king standing beside her. The courtyard fell into absolute silence. For the first time since Penelope entered Blackridge as an unnoticed maid, she no longer faced the kingdom alone. The courtyard remained suspended in silence after Tristan stepped through the circle of wolves and took his place beside Penelope. Frost drifted gently across the stone, yet no one seemed to breathe. The royal pack stood shoulder to shoulder around them, watching their alpha with quiet expectation. They had made their choice. Now it was his turn to make his. Penelope swayed where she stood, her wounded hand trembling as crimson slowly stained her sleeve. Even through the pain, her eyes searched for the poisoned battle wolf resting weakly upon the frozen ground. "Please," she whispered, barely able to speak, "don't punish him. He never wanted to hurt anyone." Tristan followed her gaze. The animal that had nearly killed her now lay peacefully at her feet because she had answered violence with compassion instead of fear. In that moment, the king understood why his wolves had trusted her long before he did. Without a word, he removed his dark cloak and gently wrapped it around her shoulders. Penelope looked up, surprised by the gesture. A faint smile touched her lips despite everything that had happened. "You'll give the whole kingdom something new to gossip about," she said softly. Tristan's expression warmed for the first time in days. "Then let them talk," he replied. "I'd rather they remember the truth than another lie." The quiet exchange broke the tension more effectively than any royal command. One by one, the guards slowly lowered their weapons. The wolves did not move. They simply watched. Nolan Pierce, however, refused to surrender. "You're making a terrible mistake," he shouted. "She has turned the royal pack against you. Can't you see it?" Tristan faced him calmly. "No, Captain. I finally see that they never turned against me at all." He glanced briefly toward Ronan before looking back at Nolan. "They've been trying to show me the truth." Everett stepped forward and extended an open hand. "Captain Pierce," he said evenly, "your sword." Nolan hesitated. His eyes searched the gathered nobles before settling on Lady Marissa. She offered no reassurance. She simply remained silent. Realizing he no longer controlled the moment, Nolan reluctantly surrendered his weapon. Graham knelt beside the exhausted battle wolf and carefully examined the wound hidden beneath its thick fur. His fingers came away marked by the same dark residue he had discovered inside Ronan's injury. Quietly, he reached beneath the shattered enclosure nearby and retrieved a small glass vial wrapped in black cloth. The sharp scent lingering inside matched the poison exactly. Graham rose and handed it to Tristan without a word. The king studied the vial before lifting his eyes toward Nolan. "Who inspected the royal kennels this morning?" Everett answered calmly. Captain Pierce signed the inspection report himself. The silence that followed was heavier than any accusation. Nolan lowered his head, unable to offer an explanation that matched the evidence before them. Across the courtyard, Lady Marissa instinctively stepped backward, hoping to disappear into the crowd before anyone noticed. Iris saw the movement first. "She's leaving," she called. Two royal guards immediately blocked the nearest archway. Marissa slowly stopped. For the first time, certainty disappeared from her face. Tristan looked from Nolan to Marissa with quiet disappointment rather than anger. "Everything that has happened," he said softly, "began because you believed fear was stronger than trust." Neither answered. They no longer needed to. Their silence revealed more than words ever could. "Captain Nolan Pierce," Tristan declared, "you are relieved of your command and placed under royal arrest until judgment is passed." His gaze shifted toward Marissa. "Lady Marissa Caldwell, you will remain under royal guard while the council hears every charge against you." Neither resisted as they were escorted away. With each step they took, the crushing weight that had settled over Blackridge seemed to lift. Only then did Penelope's strength finally give way. She stumbled, and Tristan caught her before she reached the frozen stone. Tristan gently supported her. "You've spent every day protecting others," he said quietly. "You don't have to carry every burden by yourself anymore." Tears gathered in Penelope's eyes, not from pain, But from hearing those words at last, Graham approached, carrying the ancient journal recovered that morning. He carefully opened its final surviving page. Most of the writing had faded beyond recovery, yet one sentence remained untouched by time. Asterisk, the covenant will not be fulfilled until the Alpha King freely chooses what the wolves recognized first. Asterisk, Tristan read the words in silence before gently closing the journal. This time, he did not need history to guide him. He already knew what choice awaited him. As evening settled over Blackridge, Penelope stood beside the tall window of her chamber, watching Ronan and the royal pack resting peacefully beneath the fading sky. Quiet footsteps approached from behind. Tristan stopped beside her, neither speaking nor reaching for her hand. They simply watched the wolves together. Tomorrow, before the entire kingdom, he would make a decision no prophecy could command and no ancient covenant could demand. A decision that would reveal whether an Alpha King truly possessed the courage to follow the wisdom his wolves had recognized from the very beginning. Morning sunlight streamed through the towering windows of Blackridge's great hall, bathing the ancient stone in warm gold as every noble family gathered beneath the banners of the Whitaker line. Only days earlier, many of those same voices had whispered about an insignificant maid who had somehow drawn the attention of the royal wolves. Now the hall stood in complete silence, waiting not only for the judgment of their Alpha King, but for a truth the kingdom had refused to see. Penelope stood beside Everett near the foot of the throne, wearing the same simple ivory gown Beatrice had prepared for her. She had declined every jewel and every symbol of privilege the attendants had offered. Around her neck rested only the silver leaf pendant her mother had entrusted to her as a child. Nothing about her had changed. At last, everyone else had. King Tristan entered without wearing his crown. Instead, he carried the restored journal of the Moon Wardens in both hands. Rather than ascending directly to the throne, he stopped among the assembled court, choosing to stand beside his people before speaking as their king. For generations, he began, his calm voice carrying through the silent hall. Blackridge judged worth by bloodlines, titles, and privilege. We admired power while overlooking compassion. We allowed fear to silence the quiet people whose kindness protected this kingdom every single day. He placed the journal into Dr. Graham Bellamy's hands. Graham carefully read the surviving account of the Moon Wardens and the ancient covenant preserved within its weathered pages. When the reading ended, Tristan turned toward Nolan Pierce. The former captain lowered his head without resistance. Lady Marissa ordered me to poison Ronan, he confessed. She believed that if the royal wolves became dangerous, everyone would fear the maid instead of questioning those truly responsible. Marissa slowly lifted her eyes. The pride that had once defined her had vanished, replaced by quiet remorse. I believe control could preserve Blackridge, she admitted softly. Instead, I nearly destroyed the trust that held it together. Tristan regarded them both with solemn disappointment rather than anger. Justice is not revenge, he said. Justice is making certain that no one suffers the same injustice again. By royal decree, Nolan was stripped of rank and sentenced to spend the remainder of his life rebuilding the frontier villages damaged by earlier wars, serving the people he had once considered beneath him. Marissa surrendered every noble title and accepted permanent exile from court. Justice was carried out without cruelty, allowing Blackridge to heal instead of passing bitterness from one generation to the next. When the judgments were complete, Tristan descended from the dais and stopped before Penelope. Every eye in the hall followed him. When we first met, he said quietly, I believed you were only a maid. I judged your station before I understood your heart. My wolves recognized the truth long before I did. They saw compassion where I saw ordinary service. They trusted your character before I trusted my own judgment. Slowly, Tristan lowered himself onto one knee. A quiet gasp rippled through the chamber. I cannot change the days when my silence failed you, he continued. But I can choose what kind of man and what kind of king I become because of them. He extended his hand toward her. Penelope Hartley, I do not ask you to stand beside me because an ancient covenant foretold it, or because my wolves chose you first. I ask because I freely choose you, with clear eyes, an open heart, and complete certainty. Tears shimmered in Penelope's eyes. She remembered the lonely mornings spent polishing empty corridors before sunrise, the whispered insults she had silently endured, and the countless moments she believed she would live her entire life unseen. Looking at Tristan now, she no longer saw the distant Alpha King who had once doubted her. She saw a man who had found the courage to let truth transform him. She placed her hand gently in his. "Then promise me one thing," she whispered. "No child, no servant, and no forgotten soul in Blackridge should ever believe they are invisible because of where they were born." Tristan smiled as he rose beside her. "That promise begins today." A quiet murmur spread among the servants gathered along the walls. Beatrice wiped away a tear. One by one, the maids, cooks, stable hands, and footmen slowly straightened their shoulders. For the first time, none of them lowered their eyes when the nobles looked their way. Together, Tristan and Penelope faced the assembled court as he restored the Moon Wardens to Blackridge's history, not as rulers, but as guardians devoted to preserving trust between the Alpha King, the royal wolves, and the people they protected. He proclaimed new laws shielding servants, laborers, and every common family from humiliation or abuse, declaring that dignity would never again depend upon birth or status. As the ceremony came to an end, the court followed them onto the cliffs overlooking the valley. The royal wolves were already waiting beneath the open sky. Ronan approached Penelope first and gently bowed his head before her once again. Sable followed, then every wolf in the pack. Tristan stepped beside Ronan and lowered his head as well. One by one, every noble followed their king, not because tradition demanded it, but because respect had finally replaced prejudice. Penelope rested her hand upon Ronan's shoulder, and the great wolf peacefully settled at her feet. The rest of the pack lay quietly beside him beneath the fading evening light. Tristan watched the peaceful scene with a grateful smile. "They chose well," he said softly. Penelope looked down at Ronan before meeting Tristan's eyes. "No," she whispered. "They simply saw me before anyone else did." As the last light faded across Blackridge, Ronan rested peacefully at Penelope's feet while Tristan stood beside her, not because destiny had commanded him, but because he had finally learned to trust the quiet heart his wolves had recognized from the very beginning.